Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the class. This is a recording for Math 12. And my name is Mark Cantrell, and I will be your teacher for this class. This recording is an introductory video lecture just to give you an overview of what to expect from the book. I will possibly do a separate video as to what to expect from the class as far as homework is concerned, how we will communicate, and so forth. But this recording is for you to get an overview of what the course content is. Now, just real quick, let me just mention, I've said this in my syllabus, and I've mentioned this in my emails. You do not need to buy a brand new book. You do need a book, in my opinion. I don't think it's I think it's a wise investment, but it does not need to be the new book. It can be used. It can be rented. I am not going to be using the online homework. Okay, so let's take a look here. This is the table of contents. I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. I like books, and I want to discuss with you the table of contents because this is a very well written book and it's very well organized. There are a few little typographical errors that I will point out as we go along, but I pretty much follow the book very, very closely. My goal is to have you learn how to read a math book, because if you can read a math book, you can read anything and it will help you in all of your classes. Okay, so the first thing we are going to talk about in chapter 1 is the nature of probability and statistics. Okay, so as you can see here, it's there's various sections. There are two broad categories of statistics. That's descriptive and inferential statistics. And so this first part discusses that. Then we talk about the types of data and so forth. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so that's chapter 1. It's just talking about the nature of probability and statistics. Now this next section, frequency distributions and graphs, that's chapter 2. The idea here is that many times it's very helpful to have a graph or a table that describes the data that we are concerned about. Okay, so that's what is chapter 2, a frequency distribution. Oopsie, hold on 1 second. Technical difficulties. Okay, so chapter 2 talks about how to organize the data, make it useful for you, how to graph it, how to make cartoons or pictures that will help you explain things. Okay, so obviously that's very important. Oh man. All right, sorry, I had a little technical difficulty there again. Okay, let's go back then to oh man. All right, so here we are again, chapter 1, nature of probability and statistics, chapter 2, frequency distributions and graphs. Now, the next section here, or next chapter here, data description, is going to talk about the way we will look at data. We'll have this big, huge pot of data, and we want to do something with it. Oftentimes, what we're really concerned about is what's called the measures of central tendency or the measures of variation. The measures of central tendency is another way of describing what is it on average, like the average height, the average weight. We don't care so much about individual data points, we care about what's on average. So let me explain that term, data points. A data point is an example. So if I'm talking about heights, and I have a bunch of 5th graders, I've lined them all up, and I measure Tommy, and I get his height. That's a data point. I measure Susie. That's a data point, and so forth. So we'll see what this is all about when we get to that chapter. But this is chapter 3, data description. Now I want to give you a warning ahead of time. I'll mention this again, but data description in chapter 3 and probability, I'm sorry, let me say that again. Frequency distributions here in chapter 2, and then probability distribution in chapter 5, and then number 6, chapter 6, the normal distribution. or very confusing. What's the distinction between them? A frequency distribution compared to a probability distribution. And people get that mixed up all the time. And one of the reasons people get it mixed up is because we use a lot of the same terminology. When we're here in chapter 2, we're going to talk about the mean, the median, and the mode, the variation, the standard deviation, and so forth. And we're going to use those exact same terms when we talk about a probability distribution in chapter 5 and a normal distribution in chapter 6. So for crying out loud, how confusing can you get to use the exact same words? So I'll explain as we go along what the difference is between a frequency distribution and a probability distribution. They're quite different, okay? And we'll see that as we go along. Okay, I think I mentioned chapter 3, data description. Chapter 4, that's when we really start to get into the interesting stuff, in my opinion. That's probability. I'm sure you've heard that expression before, but we're going to make it a more mathematical discussion about what we mean by probability. Chapter 6 is chapter 5, the discrete probability distributions. There's discrete variables and there's continuous variables, and we'll see what the distinction is. But basically, discrete means you're just counting, like you're counting the number of home runs that are hit. Okay, that's a discrete distribution. On the other hand, a continuous distribution is where the variables themselves are not discrete. They can be infinite variety or infinite range, so to speak. In other words, like if you're talking about the temperature, you can have a temperature of 80 degrees. You could have a temperature of 80.1 degrees. You could have a temperature of 80.15 degrees, 80.17 degrees, 80.178563. I mean, you can have as much precision as you want. So we call those continuous distributions typically. The normal distribution is an example of a continuous distribution. It's probably the most important one because it's just in real life, whether it's science or human affairs, we use the normal distribution many, many contexts. Okay, chapter 7 is confidence intervals. What we try to do there is we try to come up with an estimate for something or another, like our estimate for the mean of the distribution, our estimate for the mean of the data. Well, how good of an estimate is it? How confident are we? That's what the idea is behind confidence intervals, is how confident are you? You see this all the time in politics. They'll say, you know, candidate Jones is winning. We are based on our poll data. We think candidate Jones is going to win over candidate Smith, and there's a 3% margin of error. That's an example of confidence intervals. Chapter 8 and chapter 9 are kind of the most important things that we're going to do. The real purpose of this class, I would say, is to help you understand what do we mean by hypothesis testing. Then there's two basic types of hypothesis testing. There's chapter 8 and there's chapter 9. I'm not going to go into the details right this minute because this is just an overview. But the idea behind confidence testing, or excuse me, hypothesis testing is this. Here's I think a perfect example. Let's suppose, for the sake of this discussion, you are very interested in knowing whether a certain type of cereal is better than another type of cereal. Or let's suppose you want to know if aspirin does a better job than Tylenol. Let's suppose you want to know if people that get a vaccine for the COVID virus, do they get sick less often than people that don't get a vaccination? Those are all examples of hypothesis testing. The hypothesis is that, hey, I think that if I eat Wheaties, I'm going to be able to do more push-ups than if I eat a banana for breakfast. So that's my hypothesis that I'm trying to test, and we test it using mathematics. The next sections here, 10, correlation and regression, very important, but we're not going to cover too much of that. We're only going to cover the first two sections of chapter 10. Just really quickly, what correlation and regression mean is there's a correlation between variables. So like if you say, well, I think there's a correlation between people that, wash their hands and how often they get sick. Is there a correlation? The more you wash your hands, the less people, or the less often you get sick. That would be an example of a correlation. Regression is actually a completely different concept, and if I were king, I wouldn't put them in the same chapter. Regression is what we call curve fitting. We're trying to fit a curve to our data points. So we'll see how that goes as we get there. But we're not going to do very much of chapter 10. It's going to be section 1 and section 2. Chapter 11, unless we just have plenty of time at the end, I'm going to skip chapter 11. Chapter 12 is called Analysis of Variance. And again, that's going to be only the first two sections, section 12.1 and 12.2. Now, while I'm on the subject here, let me just mention, we're going to cover everything that I just discussed, but as far as homework is concerned, I'm only going to assign homework for chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay. And the homework is always going to be the chapter exam at the end of the chapter. Okay. And I apologize. I just looked at the book and it's called the chapter quiz. Okay. So there's a chapter quiz at the end of each chapter. Now that's different from at the end of each chapter and at the end of each section, there will be other problems that you could easily confuse, but those are called review exercises. So it's not the review exercises, it's the chapter quiz that's assigned. And at the end of each section, so at the end of section 3-2, for example, there will be exercises. I'm not assigning those for homework, but they're there for your benefit. Now let me talk about this for a little bit here. Well, actually, I'll put that on another video. So I hope that helps you, gives you an overview of all of this stuff, and I'll see you soon, or I'll talk to you soon.